"Don't move," she said, and somehow the storm listened, if only for a second, long enough for him to realize the voice wasn't afraid. Not like his was, not like the way his breath came out uneven, fogging the air at 28 degrees while the wind howled across the empty slope, carrying nothing but cold and silence. Daniel Hayes lay there, eyes open, body still, his mind sharp but trapped inside something that refused to respond. He could see her boots first, worn leather dusted with frost, then her hands steady, deliberate, checking his pulse with a precision that didn't belong to someone in a diner uniform. Emily Carter had been off shift for barely an hour, the smell of coffee still faint on her sleeves, when she took a shortcut down the mountain trail and found him, a man who didn't fit the place, his coat too expensive, his watch catching the last gray light like it didn't belong to this world. "Can you feel this?" she asked, pressing lightly against his arm. He swallowed. "No." The word barely made it out, the wind stole half of it. Her eyes didn't change, calm, focused, like she had seen worse, like this wasn't new. And that was the first thing that didn't make sense, because nothing about this should have been normal. Not the isolation, not the dropping temperature, not the fact that there was no signal on her phone no matter how high she held it. One bar, then nothing. The mountain had already decided to keep its secrets tonight. "Stay with me," she said, her voice lower now, closer, and he noticed something else. She wasn't panicking, not even a little. She moved like time wasn't running out, even though the cold was creeping in inch by inch, stealing warmth from his body, making his fingers numb before he could even try to move them. "Why are you helping me?" he managed, the question more instinct than logic, because people didn't just stay in places like this, not when they could walk away. Not when survival meant choosing yourself. First, she paused for half a second, just enough for something unspoken to pass through her eyes. Then she adjusted his collar, shielding his neck from the wind. "Because someone didn't once," she said, simple, quiet, like it wasn't a story she intended to tell. "And then she did something that made even him, a man who built his life on control and calculated risks, feel something close to disbelief." She looked at the slope below, miles of uneven terrain, no lights, no help, just darkness coming fast, and instead of waiting, instead of hoping, she made a decision. "We don't have time," she whispered, more to herself than to him, her hands already moving, tying, securing, preparing in a way that felt practiced, not guessed. The wind picked up again. Stronger now, colder, as if warning her, as if telling her this was a mistake. But she didn't stop, not once, not even when the first snow started to fall, light at first, then heavier, until the world around them blurred into white. And for the first time since he'd been found, Daniel Hayes realized something he couldn't control. He wasn't the one deciding what happened next. She was. The rope tightened across her shoulders as she tested the weight. Her breath slow, controlled, every movement deliberate, as if she had done this before. Daniel could feel none of it, not the cold digging into his back, not the pressure as she secured him against her, only the faint shift of gravity telling him he was no longer alone on the ground. "Stay with me," she said again, closer this time, her voice cutting through the wind that now roared louder, stronger, like the mountain was waking up. He wanted to ask how far, how long, how possible any of this was, but the questions felt heavy, slower than the storm closing in. She adjusted her footing, boots pressing into the snow, testing each step before committing. Then she moved, one step, then another, careful, steady, never rushing. The slope ahead stretched for miles, uneven, hidden beneath fresh snow that erased the trail she once knew. The temperature dropped further. His breath came thinner, and somewhere in the distance, a branch cracked under the weight of ice, echoing through the empty landscape. "You should have left," he said, the words barely audible, carried away almost instantly. She did not answer right away, just kept moving, her shoulders steady under his weight, her steps measured like she was counting something only she could see. "And let you freeze?" she said finally, not looking back, not slowing down, as if the answer was too obvious to question. Time blurred, minutes stretching into something longer, harder, the wind shifting directions, pushing against them now, each step costing more than the last, but she did not hesitate, not even when her foot slipped slightly on a hidden patch of ice. She caught herself instantly adjusting, correcting, continuing, her breathing never breaking rhythm, and that was when he noticed it. The way she moved was not random. It was trained, precise, like someone who understood limits and how to push past them without breaking. "You are not just a waitress," he said, the thought slipping out before he could stop it. She almost smiled, almost, but it faded before it could fully form. "People are not just one thing," she replied, her voice softer now, as if speaking to something far away. The snow thickened, falling faster, covering their tracks completely. turning the world into white and silence, his vision blurred at the edges, the cold creeping closer, heavier, pulling him down into something quiet and distant. "Hey," she said sharply, her tone changing for the first time, firmer, grounded. "Stay with me, Daniel." He froze for a moment, not because of the cold, but because she had used his name. He had never told her, not once, and for the first time since she found him, something else replaced the cold, something sharper, clearer, confusion. "How do you know my name?" he asked, forcing the words out. But she did not answer, not this time. She just kept walking, step after step into the storm, as if the question did not matter, as if the only thing that mattered was getting him down alive. And somewhere far ahead, faint and distant, a sound broke through the wind, low at first, almost impossible to hear, then stronger, rhythmic, mechanical, a helicopter, but it was still too far, and she knew it. He could feel it in the way her steps did not slow, did not pause, because she was not walking toward rescue. She was racing against something else entirely. The sound grew louder, cutting through the storm in steady pulses, but the distance between sound and survival still stretched too far. Emily stopped for the first time, just for a second, her chest rising and falling as she listened, calculating, measuring something unseen. Then she shifted her grip and kept moving faster now, each step more urgent, more precise, the slope steeper beneath her boots, snow sliding underfoot as the wind pushed hard against her side. Daniel felt it then, not in his body but in the way her breathing changed, slightly heavier, still controlled but carrying weight. "You cannot make it," he said quietly, the words coming slower now. His thoughts drifting at the edges. She did not respond, not with words, only with movement, stronger, more determined, like the doubt itself had no place here. The helicopter sound circled once, distant, searching, then faded again behind the storm, and for a moment the silence returned, heavier than before. "Stay with me," she said again, sharper this time, her voice pulling him back from the edge of that quiet place. "Tell me something," she added quickly, as if the conversation itself was part of keeping him here. "What is the first thing you are going to do when you get off this mountain?" He let out a weak breath that might have been a laugh. "I do not know," he admitted, and it was the first honest answer he had given in a long time. She nodded slightly, even though he could not see it. "Then think," she said. "Because you are going to need that reason." Her words stayed with him, cutting through the cold in a way nothing else had, a reason, something to hold on to, something stronger than the mountain trying to pull him under. Time stretched again, the storm shifting, the wind howling louder before suddenly easing just enough to reveal something. Ahead, faint lights barely visible through the snow. Emily saw them first, her steps adjusting instantly, angling toward them without hesitation. "There," she whispered, more breath than sound. Daniel followed her gaze as best he could, the lights flickering like something unreal, but they were there, steady, growing closer with every step she forced forward. The ground leveled slightly, the slope easing as they descended, and then the sound returned, louder now, the helicopter braking. Through the clouds above, its searchlight cutting across the white landscape in wide arcs, scanning, searching, finding. "We are here," she said, her voice finally breaking just a little, not from fear, but from the weight of everything she had carried. The light passed over them once, then again, slower this time, stopping, locking onto them, and suddenly the darkness was gone, replaced by a blinding beam that turned night into something almost like day. Voices echoed faintly from above, distant but real, and for the first time, Daniel felt something shift, not in his body, but in the certainty that he would not disappear on this mountain. But as the helicopter circled lower and the rescue team prepared to reach them, Emily did something unexpected. She gently lowered him onto the snow, her hands steady, careful, making sure he was supported. Then she stepped back, just one step. Then another, her eyes lingering on him for a fraction of a second, quiet, unreadable, before she turned slightly away from the light, as if she was already leaving before anyone could ask her to stay. The light held steady on him, bright and unwavering, voices now clearer through the wind as figures descended with practiced urgency, their movements quick but controlled, the kind of efficiency built on repetition and training. "We have him," someone called out, the words sharp against the fading storm. Daniel tried to turn his head to look for her, but his body refused, his voice barely followed. "Wait," he said, though it came out more like breath than sound. They were already beside him, checking, assessing, working with quiet focus, hands adjusting, securing, lifting him onto a stretcher with care that felt distant, unreal, the cold beginning to slip away under layers of warmth and movement, but his eyes kept searching the edge of the light, the place where shadow met snow, where She had been just seconds ago. There was someone. He managed, forcing the words out. One of the rescuers glanced at him briefly. Sir, you are safe now, just stay with us. But that was not the answer he needed, not the one he was asking for. The helicopter blades cut louder overhead as they prepared to lift, the beam shifting slightly, widening, scanning the surrounding slope, but there was nothing. No second set of footprints, no figure moving away, just untouched snow already covering everything that had happened, as if the mountain had decided to erase her the moment she stepped out of the light. Daniel's eyes narrowed slightly, confusion cutting through the fading exhaustion. That was not possible. He had felt her, heard her, the weight of her steps, the steadiness of her voice. She was right here. He said again, stronger this time, but the rescuers only exchanged quick glances, their focus never breaking from their task, because for them, there was only one person on this mountain worth saving. The stretcher lifted, rising toward the helicopter, the ground slipping away beneath him, the light shifting once more across the slope, and for a brief second, just before they cleared the edge of the ridge, he saw something, a faint outline far below, near the line of trees, a single figure moving slowly, deliberately, away from the light, away from the noise, as if disappearing was part of the plan. His breath caught, but the moment passed too quickly. The angle changed, the storm closing in again, and she was gone, completely swallowed by distance and snow. The helicopter door shut with a heavy sound, sealing him inside warmth and noise and certainty, but none of it felt complete, not without an answer to the one thing that did not fit. Did you get her? He asked. His voice quieter now, almost to himself. The medic looked up briefly, confused. Sir, there was no one else up there. And that was when the silence returned, not the kind carried by the wind, but something deeper, something that settled in the space between what he knew and what no one else could see, because he was certain of one thing. He had not survived that mountain alone. The noise of the helicopter filled everything, a constant roar that should have drowned out his thoughts, but it did not. It only made the silence inside his mind louder. Daniel lay still, wrapped in thermal blankets, oxygen steady, vital signs returning to something stable. Yet none of it felt real, not compared to the memory of her voice cutting through the storm, calm, certain, unshaken. There was no one else up there, the medic had said, but that sentence refused to settle. It stayed sharp, unresolved, like a detail in a deal that did not add up. His eyes drifted to the open edge of the cabin where the light from the mountain faded into darkness. And for a moment he thought he saw movement again, something small, distant, but it disappeared before he could be sure. The helicopter banked toward the city, lights appearing below like a different world, entirely warm, controlled, predictable. Everything he understood, everything he built his life on, and yet none of it explained her. Sir, can you tell me your name? The medic asked, routine, grounding. Daniel Hayes. He answered automatically, the name carrying weight everywhere except here, except tonight, where it had meant nothing to the one person who mattered. The medic nodded, making notes, but Daniel's mind was already elsewhere, replaying every second, every word, every movement, the way she checked his pulse, the way she calculated distance without hesitation, the way she knew when to push and when to pause. That was not luck, that was not instinct alone, that was training, experience, something learned the hard way. Run a search, he said suddenly, his voice stronger now, clearer. The medic looked up, confused. Excuse me? When we land, Daniel continued, steady, controlled, the tone of someone used to being heard. I need you to contact my office. I want every ranger report, every local record, every employee working within 10 miles of that trail. The medic hesitated, then nodded slowly, recognizing the shift, the authority returning. We can arrange that, he said, but Daniel was already ahead of him, already building the question into something actionable, something solvable, because that was what he did. He found answers, he uncovered what others missed, except this time it felt different, because this was not a deal, not a strategy, not a risk he had chosen. This was something that had happened to him, something he could not control, and the only thing he had left was the certainty that she existed, somewhere beyond the reach of the reports and the data. The helicopter descended, the city rising up to meet them, lights reflecting against glass and steel, a world of precision and order. But as they touched down and the doors opened, Daniel did not look at the people waiting, the staff, the security, the familiar faces ready to take over. He looked back instead, toward the mountain barely visible in the distance, now just a shadow against the night sky, and for the first time in years, he felt something he could not quantify, not measure, not predict, because somewhere out there, in the cold and the silence, was a woman who had carried him down a mountain and then vanished without a trace, and no matter how much power he had, no matter how many resources he could command, he knew one thing with absolute clarity: finding her would not be as simple as giving an order. The hospital lights were too bright, too clean, too controlled, everything the mountain had not been. Daniel lay still as machines hummed quietly around him, each sound measured, predictable, but his mind refused to settle into that order. It stayed somewhere else, somewhere colder, somewhere where a voice had cut through chaos with calm certainty. "We could not find anyone matching your description," the assistant said carefully, standing at the foot of his bed with a tablet in hand, her tone professional but cautious, because she had already repeated this twice, and each time the answer had not changed. Daniel did not respond immediately, his eyes fixed on the window where the city stretched endlessly, lights flickering in perfect symmetry, a world that answered to him, a world that made sense except for one missing piece. "Try again," he said finally, his voice quiet but firm, not raised, not impatient, just absolute, the kind of tone that did not ask. The assistant hesitated for a fraction of a second, then nodded. "We checked all local employee records, nearby diners, service staff, even volunteer registries. There is no Emily Carter connected to that area," she said, choosing each word carefully. Daniel's gaze shifted slightly, just enough to acknowledge the name Emily Carter. It sounded right, it felt right, even though he had never heard her say it, even though it had come from a place he could not explain. "Then she is not in your system," he replied, simple, direct, dismissing the conclusion without raising his voice, because absence of proof was not proof of absence, not in his world, not in any world that made sense. The assistant lowered her tablet slightly, unsure how to proceed, because this was not a business problem, not something that could be solved with data alone. "Sir, with respect, it is possible you were disoriented. The conditions were extreme," she began, but she stopped when his eyes met hers, calm, steady, unshaken. "I know what I experienced," he said, and there was no anger in it, only certainty, the kind that did not need to be defended. Silence settled in the room, heavy but not uncomfortable, just unresolved. Daniel turned his gaze back to the window, but this time, he was not looking at the city. He was seeing something else entirely: worn boots against fresh snow, steady hands in freezing air, a voice that never once hesitated. "Expand the search," he said after a moment, slower now, more deliberate. "Check medical records, training licenses, anyone with field experience in trauma care who is not currently practicing." The assistant blinked, surprised by the direction, but nodded quickly, already noting it down. "Yes, sir," she said, because this was something she understood, a pattern, a lead, something that could be followed. But as she turned to leave, Daniel spoke again, softer this time, almost to himself. "She knew my name." The words hung in the air, quiet but heavy, and for the first time, even the assistant felt something shift, because that was not something data could explain, not easily, not cleanly. The door closed behind her, leaving the room silent again. Daniel exhaled slowly, his hand resting lightly against the blanket, still controlled, but his mind was already moving, not through spreadsheets or projections, but through something far less structured, something that did not follow rules, because somewhere beyond the reach of systems and records was a woman who had carried him through a storm and then disappeared. And the more the world told him she did not exist, the more certain he became that she did. The file landed on his desk just before sunrise, thin, almost empty, the kind of report that would normally be dismissed without a second glance. But Daniel did not touch it right away, he just looked at it, the way he used to study risks before deciding whether they were worth taking. The city outside still quiet, the first light barely breaking through the glass. "This is everything we could find," his assistant said, her voice careful, measured, because she already knew it would not be enough. Daniel opened the file slowly, page by page, each one confirming the same thing. No records, no employment history, no medical license, no identification tied to the name Emily Carter within a 100-mile radius of that mountain. Nothing that should have existed if she had lived a normal life. His fingers paused on the last page, a single note added at the bottom, almost an afterthought. "Unverified sighting, small diner 15 miles from trail access." He read it once, then again, the words simple, but they held something the rest of the file did not. Possibility. He closed the folder and stood, the movement smooth, controlled but final. "Cancel everything this morning," he said, already reaching for his coat. His assistant blinked, surprised. "You have a board meeting in 45 minutes, she reminded him, but he was already walking past her. "Reschedule," he replied without slowing down, the decision made before the objection could finish forming, because this was not a meeting that could wait. The drive took less than 30 minutes. The city fading quickly into open roads, then smaller ones until the buildings thinned and the landscape changed, quieter, less controlled, the kind of place where things did not always leave records. The diner was easy to miss, a single sign weathered, flickering slightly in the morning light. Parked between two empty trucks, Daniel stepped out, the air still cold, but nothing like the mountain. This was manageable, predictable. He pushed the door open, a small bell chiming overhead, the sound simple, ordinary, the kind of detail that should not matter, but it did. The inside was warm, quiet, the smell of coffee fresh, familiar. A few early customers sat scattered across the room, none of them looking up for more than a second, because to them, he was just another person walking in, not a name, not a headline, just someone passing through. And for the first time since the mountain that felt closer to the truth, he stepped forward slowly, his eyes scanning the room, every detail sharper than it needed to be, the counter, the worn stools, the coffee machine humming softly. And then he saw it, not her, not yet, but something else, a cup sitting near the edge of the counter, still half full, steam barely rising, and beside it, a pair of worn gloves, familiar in a way he could not explain. His gaze lingered there, longer than necessary, until a voice broke the silence. "You are looking for someone," it said, calm, steady, and for a moment, the world narrowed again. Not to the size of the city, not to the scope of his influence, but to something much smaller, much quieter. He turned slowly, his breath catching just slightly, because this time he knew whatever answer waited in this room, it would not be something he could control. He turned toward the voice slowly, not out of hesitation, but because something in it felt familiar, not the sound itself, but the calm beneath it, steady, unshaken, the kind that did not react to who he was or what he represented. Just like on the mountain, behind the counter stood an older man, late 60s, gray hair, worn apron, his posture relaxed but observant, like someone who had seen more than he needed to say. "Coffee?" the man asked, as if that was the only question that mattered. Daniel glanced once more at the cup on the counter, still warm, still recent, then back at the man. "The person who was here," he said, his voice controlled, direct. "Where is she?" The man did not answer right away. Instead he reached for a cloth, wiping the counter in slow, deliberate motions as if time moved differently here. "People come and go," he said finally, not looking up. "That is what they do." Daniel stepped closer, the distance between them shrinking, but the gap in understanding still wide. "She was here," he insisted, quieter now, not forceful, just certain. The man paused, just for a second, then set the cloth down, his eyes lifting to meet Daniel's for the first time. And there it was, recognition, not of his face, not of his name, but of something else, something deeper. "You are the one from the mountain," he said, not as a question, but as a fact. Daniel's expression did not change, but something inside him tightened, sharpened. "You know her," he replied, and this time it was not a guess. The man leaned back slightly, exhaling through his nose as if weighing something unseen. "I know of her," he corrected, subtle, precise, and that difference mattered. "Then tell me where she is," Daniel said, and for the first time there was a trace of urgency beneath the control, not desperation, not yet, but close enough to be noticed. The man studied him for a long moment, then glanced at the gloves on the counter, the same worn leather Daniel had seen before. "She does not stay," he said quietly. "Not anywhere for long." Daniel followed his gaze to the gloves, the confirmation hitting. Without needing to be spoken, she had been here minutes ago, maybe less, the timing too exact to ignore. "Why?" Daniel asked, the question simple, but carrying more than just curiosity. The man gave a small, almost imperceptible shake of his head. "Some people are not running," he said, his voice softer now. "They are just not stopping." The words lingered, not offering clarity, but something else, perspective. Daniel's eyes narrowed slightly, processing, adjusting, the way he always did. But this was different. This was not data, not strategy. This was something that refused to fit into a system. "She knew my name," he said, almost to himself, and the man's expression shifted, just enough to confirm that detail mattered. "That sounds like her," he replied, calm, certain, as if it explained more than it should. Silence settled between them again. But this time it was not empty. It was full of something unsaid, something just out of reach. Daniel reached for the gloves slowly, his fingers brushing against the worn leather, still slightly warm, and for a brief moment everything else faded, the city, the power, the control, all of it replaced by a single, undeniable truth. He had been here too late, by minutes, maybe seconds, and yet, the feeling was not loss, not entirely, because if she had been here, if she had left something behind, then she was still within reach, just not in the way he was used to finding things. He looked back up at the man, His voice steady again but different now, less commanding, more certain. "If she comes back," he said, "tell her I am looking for her." The man held his gaze, then nodded once slowly, as if acknowledging something more than just a message. "She already knows," he replied, and for the first time since stepping into the diner, Daniel felt something shift again, not confusion, not uncertainty, but something quieter, something closer to understanding, because this was not a search that would end with a simple answer, and somehow, he knew, she had already decided when they would meet again. The bell above the door rang softly as Daniel stepped outside, the cold air meeting him with a quiet stillness that felt almost deliberate, like the world here moved at its own pace, untouched by urgency, untouched by power. He stood there for a moment, the worn gloves still in his hand, their weight insignificant yet impossible to ignore. Inside, the man returned to his routine as if nothing unusual had happened, as if people like her passing through were not events but patterns, and that thought stayed with him, patterns, not accidents. Daniel looked down the road, empty in both directions, no sign of movement, no trace of where she had gone, and for the first time, he did not reach for his phone, did not call, did not command, because something in him understood that this was not a path that could be tracked in the usual way. Instead, he turned back toward his car slowly, each step measured, controlled, but carrying something new, something quieter. The drive back felt different, the same roads, the same distance, but none of it held the same clarity, because now every detail felt like it could matter. The way the diner sat just far enough from the main road, the timing of her leaving, the way the man spoke about her, not with concern, not with curiosity, but with acceptance, as if she existed outside of the rules most people followed. The city rose ahead again, familiar, structured, predictable, and yet it felt smaller now, not in size, but in certainty. Daniel parked and stepped out, the building towering above him, glass and steel reflecting a world he controlled. But as he entered, the usual rhythm did not settle over him, the greetings, the nods, the quiet acknowledgement of his presence, all of it felt distant, like something he was observing rather than part of. "Sir, the board is waiting," his assistant said, stepping forward with careful urgency, but he shook his head slightly, not dismissing her, just redirecting something else. "Reschedule," he said again, and this time there was no surprise, only understanding that something had shifted. He moved past her without slowing into his office, the door closing behind him with a soft click. The silence inside was immediate, controlled, but it did not hold him the same way it used to. He placed the gloves on his desk, side by side, their worn surface contrasting sharply with everything around them, polished wood, clean lines, perfection, and yet, those gloves carried something none of it did. Something real, something earned. His gaze lingered there longer than it should have, until his phone vibrated lightly against the desk, a message, short, direct, from a number he did not recognize, no name, no identifier, just words. "You should not be looking for me." Daniel stared at the screen, the world narrowing again, not to the size of the city, not to the reach of his influence, but to a single line of text that carried more weight than any contract he had ever signed. His fingers hovered for a moment, then moved, typing slowly, deliberately. "You knew I would." He sent it without hesitation. The response came faster than expected, almost immediate. "That does not mean you understand." The words simple, but they carried the same tone as her voice on the mountain, calm, certain, unshaken. Daniel exhaled quietly, leaning back slightly, his eyes still fixed on the screen, because for the first time since this began, the distance between them was no longer measured in miles or silence. It was something else entirely, something closer, something intentional. And as the phone remained still in his hand, one thought settled in with absolute clarity. This was no longer just a search, it was a conversation she had already chosen to start. The message stayed on the screen longer than it should have, not because it was unclear, but because it was too precise, too deliberate. Daniel read it again. "That does not mean you understand." The words simple, but layered in a way that resisted quick interpretation. His fingers hovered above the phone, not searching for control this time, but for the right response, something he had not needed to do in years. "Then help me understand." He typed, slower now, each word chosen without urgency, without pressure. The reply did not come immediately, and that silence felt different from before. Not absence but distance. Intentional, measured, like she decided when time moved. Minutes passed. The city continued outside his window, meetings started and ended, decisions were made without him, but none of it pulled his attention away. Then the phone vibrated again, a single line. "Why were you on that mountain?" Daniel leaned back slightly, the question unexpected, not because it was difficult but because it shifted everything. This was not about her anymore, not directly, it was about him. He stared at the screen, considering, because the easy answer would have been simple business routine, a break from the city, but that was not the truth, not entirely. I want it quiet, he typed finally, and even as he sent it, he knew how incomplete it sounded. The response came quicker this time, almost immediate. You have entire buildings designed to be quiet. Daniel exhaled softly, a faint hint of something unfamiliar crossing his expression. Not frustration but recognition. She was not asking for information, she was testing something deeper, something beneath the surface. His gaze shifted briefly to the gloves on his desk, worn, unpolished, real, then back to the screen. That is not the same kind of quiet, he replied, and for the first time the answer felt closer to truth than explanation. The phone remained still for a few seconds, then lit up again. No, it is not. The words carried something softer now, less guarded, like a line had been crossed or opened. Daniel's posture shifted slightly, leaning forward, not out of urgency but focus. This was no longer a search, not even a pursuit, it was something else, something unfolding in real time. Then what kind is it? He asked, the question direct but not demanding. The response took longer this time, long enough for the silence to feel intentional again. Then finally the screen lit up. The kind that does not answer to you. Daniel read it once, then again, and for a moment the weight of those words settled in a way nothing else had, because they were not just about the mountain, not just about the storm, they were about everything he had built his life around: control, predictability, outcomes, and the absence of all three. He looked out the window again, the city stretching endlessly, every light, every movement part of a system he understood, and yet somewhere beyond all of it was a woman who existed outside that system completely, who had stepped into his world for one moment, changed everything, and then stepped out again without leaving a trace. His phone remained in his hand, the conversation paused but not ended, because for the first time, Daniel was not trying to close a deal, not trying to reach a conclusion. He was waiting, and in that waiting, something unfamiliar took shape, not control, not certainty, but something quieter, something he could not command, only follow. The silence did not feel empty anymore, it felt intentional, like space being given rather than distance being created. Daniel remained by the window, the phone still in his hand, but his focus had shifted inward, not toward answers, but toward the questions she was leaving behind, each one quieter than the last, but heavier, more precise. He had built his life on clarity, on knowing the next step, before anyone else even saw the path, but this was different. This required something he was not used to: patience. The phone vibrated again, soft, almost subtle, as if it knew it did not need to demand attention. He looked down, the message already there, waiting. You are not used to waiting. Daniel let out a breath that almost resembled a quiet laugh, not amused but understood. She was right, not because she knew him, but because she could see through the patterns he carried. No, he replied, simple, without defense. The response came slower this time, not immediate but not distant either, just measured. Then this is where it starts. He read it carefully, the words settling deeper than they should have, because they did not feel like instructions, they felt like a boundary, or maybe an invitation. He glanced again at the gloves on his desk, then back to the city, everything moving, everything controlled, everything predictable, and yet none of it felt as significant as this moment, this pause. Why did you leave? He asked, the question direct but not demanding, and for a moment there was no reply. The seconds stretched longer, quieter, until finally the screen lit up again. Because you would have looked at me differently. Daniel's eyes narrowed slightly, not in confusion but in recognition. He understood that kind of difference, the shift that came with titles, with wealth, with power, the way people changed once they knew who he was. You think I would have? He replied, not arguing, just testing the line she had drawn. The response came almost instantly. I know you would have. The certainty in it was not sharp, not accusing, just factual, and that made it harder to dismiss. Daniel leaned forward slightly, his elbows resting on the desk, his gaze fixed on the screen, because now the conversation had shifted again, deeper, more personal, less about the mountain, more about the space between them. And now, he typed slower, more deliberate, the question carrying more than just curiosity. The reply took longer, long enough for the silence to feel like part of the answer. Then finally it appeared. Now you are trying not to. Daniel read it twice, the words simple, but they landed with a quiet precision he could not ignore, because she was right again, not completely but enough to matter. He was trying not to control, not to define, but to understand without changing what he was looking at, something he had never needed to do before. His grip on the phone loosened slightly, not from uncertainty, but from something else, something closer to acceptance. The conversation did not need to move faster, did not need to resolve, it only needed to continue, and as he sat there, the city stretching endlessly beyond the glass, one thought settled in with quiet certainty. This was no longer about finding her, it was about becoming someone who could actually see her. When he did, the message lingered in the quiet space between them, not unanswered, just allowed to breathe. Daniel did not rush this time, did not reach for control or direction. He simply stood there, the city reflecting back at him through the glass, but for the first time it did not feel like a mirror, it felt like a distance. His phone rested lightly in his hand, not gripped, not held with purpose, just present, like the moment itself. Then what happens now? He finally typed, the question simple, but without demand, without expectation. The response took longer than before, not seconds but minutes, long enough for the rhythm of the city to return around him. Footsteps outside his office, muted conversations, the quiet hum of systems running without pause, and yet, none of it pulled him away. Then the screen lit up again. "Now you stop trying to find me." Daniel read it once, then again, his expression unchanged, but something inside him shifted slightly, not resistance, not disagreement, just recognition. "And if I do not?" he replied, not challenging, just honest. The answer came slower this time, measured, deliberate. "Then you will keep missing me." The words settled differently, not as a warning, but as a truth he could not negotiate with. Daniel exhaled quietly, his gaze drifting once more to the gloves on his desk, still out of place, still real in a way nothing else in the room was. He reached for them, his fingers tracing the worn edges, the subtle marks of use, of time, of something lived rather than acquired, and in that moment the answer did not come from the phone, it came from something else, something quieter. "You are not hiding," he typed slowly. "You are just not standing still." The response came almost immediately, as if she had been waiting for that exact understanding. Yes, one word, simple, but it carried more weight than anything she had said before. Daniel nodded slightly to himself, not because he had solved anything, but because he had finally aligned with something he could not control. "Then I will not chase you," he continued, the words deliberate, not a strategy, not a tactic, just a decision. The silence that followed was different. Not distant, not measured, but still complete. And for a moment he wondered if that was the end of it, not in a dramatic way, not in loss, just in completion, until the phone vibrated one last time, softer than before, almost like a closing note. "Good," she wrote, and then, after a pause that felt intentional, "Next time you will not need to ask where I am." Daniel read the message slowly, the meaning settling in layers, not immediate, not obvious, but clear enough. He placed the phone down gently beside the gloves, his posture relaxed. Not in defeat, but in something else entirely, something closer to acceptance, because for the first time, he understood that this was not about distance, not about location, not about searching or finding, it was about recognition, about becoming aware of something that had always been there, just unseen, just overlooked. And as he stood there, the city moving endlessly around him, one quiet realization settled in without resistance. The next time he saw her, it would not be because he found her, it would be because he finally knew how to look. The city did not change, but he did, and that was the difference, subtle at first, almost invisible, the way he no longer rushed past the small things, the way his eyes lingered where they used to move on. Daniel Hayes still ran companies, still made decisions that moved numbers most people could not comprehend, but somewhere between the mountain and the silence that followed, something in him had shifted, not loudly, not dramatically, just enough to matter. Days passed, then weeks, and he did not return to the diner, did not send another message, did not try to trace what could not be tracked. Instead, he listened not for her voice, but for the absence of noise, the kind she had spoken about, the kind that did not answer to him. And then one morning, without planning it, without reason he could explain, he found himself walking into a place that looked almost exactly the same. Not the same diner, not the same road, but the same feeling, quiet, unremarkable, real. The bell above the door rang softly as he stepped inside. The room warm, simple, unchanged by who entered it. He paused for a moment, not searching, not expecting, just present, and then he saw her, not at the center of the room, not waiting, not standing out, just there. Behind the counter, pouring coffee into a cup like it was the only thing that mattered. Emily Carter did not look surprised, did not look up right away. She simply finished what she was doing, set the cup down, and then met his eyes, calm, steady, the same as the night the mountain tried to take him. No tension, no distance, just recognition. "You found quiet," she said, her voice unchanged, as if the time between had been nothing more than a pause. Daniel did not step closer immediately, did Not speak right away because this time there was nothing to prove, nothing to confirm. He simply nodded once, a small movement that carried more than any explanation. I stopped looking, he replied, and the words felt right, not rehearsed, not strategic, just true. She studied him for a moment, not evaluating, not testing, just seeing, and then she smiled, not wide, not dramatic, just enough to shift the space between them. Good, she said softly, turning slightly to pour another cup, the motion simple, familiar, grounding. Daniel stepped forward then, slow, unhurried, taking a seat at the counter like any other customer. No title, no weight, just a man who had walked into a quiet place and understood why it mattered. She placed the cup in front of him without asking, the steam rising gently, carrying the same warmth he remembered from the mountain, and for a moment, neither of them spoke, because nothing needed to be filled. The silence was not empty, it was complete, and as he wrapped his hands around the cup, feeling the heat settle into something real, something present, one thought remained, quiet but clear, the kind that did not demand attention, but stayed anyway. Some people do not disappear, they simply exist where you have not learned to see them yet.